I love you so much, I whispered to myself, clutching the anniversary card against my chest as I stood frozen in the doorway of my father's executive office. Neither my husband Connor nor Jessica, my cousin and our family law firm's rising star, noticed me. They were too engrossed in reviewing divorce papers spread across my father's antique desk, whispering about how they'd blindside me after tonight's anniversary celebration. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The timing couldn't be better, Jessica said, tapping a manicured fingernail against a clause highlighted in yellow. Once the partners finish their toasts to your 5 years together, you'll have the perfect emotional leverage to get her to sign without reading the details. I should have realized something was wrong when Connor insisted on celebrating our 5th anniversary at my family's law firm instead of the intimate mountain retreat I'd spent months planning. It'll be more meaningful, he'd said with that practiced courtroom smile, the one that had convinced countless juries but now seemed like a stranger's expression on my husband's face. The irony wasn't lost on me. Harrington and Associates, the firm my grandfather had founded, my father had expanded, and I was being groomed to lead someday, was now the setting for my marriage's execution. The mahogany-paneled walls that represented generations of my family's legacy would witness my humiliation. Before we continue, drop a comment telling us where you're tuning in from. If my story resonates with you, please subscribe because tomorrow I've saved something extraordinary that might change how you approach relationships forever. The spring evening had started perfectly. The firm's conference center had been transformed into an elegant venue, crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over gathered colleagues, family members, and friends. White roses, my favorite, adorned every table, their subtle fragrance wafting through the air as servers circulated with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. I'd spent weeks coordinating with the events team, selecting every detail from the bad string quartet playing our wedding song to the custom-engraved champagne flutes. The 5-tier anniversary cake waited in the kitchen, each layer representing a year of what I'd thought was a dream marriage. "Have you seen Connor?" I asked my best friend Olivia, who was admiring the photo montage of our marriage I'd painstakingly assembled. She checked her watch, her brow furrowing slightly. "I think I saw him heading to your father's office with Jessica, probably last-minute speech preparations." Jessica Harrington, my father's brother's daughter, Harvard Law with honors, just like Connor, ambitious, brilliant, and always impeccably dressed in designer suits that somehow looked both conservative and alluring. I'd noticed how she looked at Connor during family gatherings, but I'd dismissed it as professional admiration. After all, Connor was the firm's youngest partner, a rising star in corporate law with a reputation for closing impossible deals. "On your anniversary celebration?" Olivia's voice carried a note of concern. "That seems odd, even for workaholics like those two." Something in her tone made my stomach clench. I'd been ignoring signs for months, the late-night strategy sessions, the weekend conferences they both attended, the hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. But tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was supposed to be about us, about celebrating what we'd built together. "I'll go find them," I said, forcing a smile. "Make sure the partners aren't cornering him about the Westlake merger." I walked through the familiar corridors of Harrington and Associates, my heels clicking against the marble floors. The sound echoed through the hallway past the wall of partners. 3 generations of Harringtons looking down with solemn approval. My grandfather, the founder. My father, the expander. Me, the future. Each step toward my father's office felt heavier than the last. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the darkened hallway. I heard their voices before I saw them, hushed but clear in the relative quiet. "Everything's arranged." Jessica's voice was silky and confident. "I've reviewed all the documents personally. Once she signs tonight, there's nothing she can do. The prenup is ironclad." "You're sure about the timing?" Connor's voice, the one he used during difficult negotiations. "After the celebration seems cruel." "It's perfect timing," Jessica replied. "She'll be emotional, vulnerable, more likely to sign quickly without scrutinizing the terms. We've worked too hard to let her realize what's happening with the offshore accounts or the partnership stake manipulations." I stood there, my hand pressed against the doorframe, my world tilting on its axis. The celebration sounds faded to a distant hum as blood rushed in my ears. Through the gap in the door, I could see them clearly. Jessica perched on the edge of my father's desk, her skirt riding higher than would be appropriate in court, while Connor leaned in his chair, divorce papers spread between them like a battle plan. "You're brilliant. You know that?" Connor said, reaching for her hand. "I couldn't have structured this without you." "Once everything's settled, you'll be free," Jessica said, her fingers intertwining with his. "The prenup ensures she gets nothing from your partnership stake, and with your name already established at the firm, we can move forward with our plans." "And the family?" Connor asked, his voice cautious. "Your uncle has always treated me like a son." Jessica laughed, that rich, confident laugh that echoed her father's. "Daddy always says business is business. Once they see the documentation we've prepared about her incompetence in handling client accounts, they'll understand it was necessary. I've been building that narrative with the senior partners for months." The anniversary card in my hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I watched as Jessica leaned forward, her lips meeting Connor's in a practiced kiss. They'd done this before, probably countless times right here in my family's firm. "We should head back," Jessica said, pulling away. "People will notice we're gone." "Let them," Connor replied, pulling her closer. "In a few hours, none of it will matter." I backed away from the door, my legs threatening to give way beneath me. 5 years of marriage, a shared home, a shared career, dreams of starting a family, all of it built on lies. And they weren't just planning to end my marriage, they were plotting to destroy my professional reputation and position within my own family's firm. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined. This wasn't just about Connor and Jessica's affair. This was a calculated attack on everything I was, everything I'd worked for, everything I would become. Olivia found me in the ladies' room, my hands gripping the marble countertop as I stared, unseeing at my reflection. One look at my face and she knew something was terribly wrong. "Catherine," she whispered, quickly checking that we were alone. "What happened?" "I need your help," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I need you to call your brother." Olivia's brother Andrew was a forensic accountant who specialized in high-profile divorce cases. If Connor thought he could hide money and manipulate partnership stakes without my knowledge, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. "Whatever you need," Olivia said, already pulling out her phone. "But first, tell me what's going on." In hushed tones, I explained what I'd overheard. With each detail, Olivia's expression hardened from concern to cold fury. "Those conniving—" She bit back the word. "Okay, Andrew can be here within an hour, but what do we do until then?" We need to get through this party without letting them know I've discovered their plan, I said, straightening my shoulders. Connor had taught me something valuable after all those years of watching him in the courtroom. Sometimes the best defense is making your opponent think they're winning. Help me fix my makeup, I said to Olivia. We have an anniversary to celebrate. As I reapplied my lipstick, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me, her eyes harder, her smile sharper. Connor. And Jessica thought they had orchestrated the perfect plan, but they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. I walked back into the celebration, accepting congratulations with practiced grace. Connor and Jessica had returned, standing slightly apart, playing their roles perfectly. I watched as he raised his glass in my direction, that familiar smile in place. To my beautiful wife, he announced to the gathered crowd. Happy anniversary, darling. I smiled back, raising my champagne flute. Let them think they had the upper hand. Let them believe their plan was flawless. Because while they were plotting my humiliation, they'd given me something invaluable, the element of surprise. The party continued around me, but everything had changed. Each congratulations felt hollow, each toast tainted. But beneath the pain and betrayal, something else was growing. Determination. I'd grown up in a family of lawyers. I'd watched my grandfather outmaneuver corporate giants. I'd seen my father turn seemingly unwinnable cases into landmark victories. The Harrington blood ran through my veins, not Connor's. He thought he'd written the perfect ending to our marriage. He was about to learn that this was just the beginning, and I would write the final chapter. Preparing and narrating this story took considerable time and effort, so if you're finding value in it, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support means everything to us. Now, let's continue with what happened next. The last guest left just after midnight, leaving behind empty champagne flutes and the lingering scent of white roses that now felt cloying and artificial. I watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as Connor walked Jessica to her car, their bodies maintaining a careful distance, a performance for any watching eyes. My fingers tightened around the crystal flute in my hand as he leaned in, presumably to open her door, their faces close enough for a whispered exchange. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Don't break that, Olivia said softly, gently prying the glass from my grip. It's Waterford, crystal, and more importantly, we need you thinking clearly right now. She was right. The fury coursing through my veins wouldn't help me. I needed precision, calculation, the same skills I'd developed earning my law degree and working my way up through the family firm while Connor built his reputation in the corporate division. Andrew's in your father's private library, Olivia continued, setting the glass aside. He said to secure any financial documents you can find without raising suspicion, bank statements, partnership agreements, client files, anything that might show what Connor and Jessica have been planning. I nodded, my mind already cataloging the possible locations. Connor keeps a home office. He has a safe behind the family portrait. He thinks I don't know the combination, but I saw him input it last Christmas. The memory stung. I'd been watching him that day to see what he was hiding, thinking it might be my anniversary gift. How naive I'd been. The front door opened, and Connor's footsteps echoed through the foyer. Olivia squeezed my hand. Remember, let him think he's in control. We need time to build our case. Connor appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, that practiced smile still in place. Wonderful celebration, darling, though you must be exhausted. Why don't you head up to bed? I have a few briefs to review before tomorrow's meeting. Briefs. Is that what he called the divorce papers now? I forced a smile, years of negotiating with difficult clients making it feel almost natural. Of course. Don't work too late. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Olivia gathered her things, playing her part perfectly. Thanks for a lovely evening. Lunch tomorrow? Perfect, I replied. That new bistro near the courthouse. Once Olivia left, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, our shared space of 5 years that now felt like a stranger's room. How many nights had he lain beside me planning my downfall? How many mornings had he kissed me goodbye before meeting Jessica to continue their conspiracy? I heard his home office door close, followed by the muffled sound of his voice, probably calling Jessica, unable to wait even an hour before speaking to her again. I changed into silk pajamas, an anniversary gift from Connor that I now wanted to burn, and pretended to settle into bed. 2 hours later, his footsteps moved from his office to the guest room. He didn't even try to hide it anymore, his excuse of late-night work wearing thin months ago. The guest room had gradually accumulated his things, a spare toothbrush, pajamas, his favorite robe, another sign I'd chosen to ignore. Once I was certain he was asleep, I slipped out of bed. The house creaked familiarly beneath my feet as I made my way to his office. The family portrait swung aside silently. I'd oiled the hinges last week under the guise of spring cleaning, revealing the wall safe. 11/08/18, our wedding date. The irony wasn't lost on me as the safe clicked open. Inside, organized with his typical precision, lay folders of documents. My hands trembled as I used my phone to photograph each page, careful to return them exactly as I'd found them. Bank statements showing large transfers to accounts I'd never seen. Partnership agreement amendments with my signature that I'd never signed. A valuation of his partnership stake that differed wildly from what had been reported to the firm's board. And there, at the bottom, a manila envelope containing a copy of the divorce papers he planned to serve me. I photographed everything, my lawyer's instincts kicking in about maintaining evidence chains. As I reached to replace the last folder, something caught my eye. A small velvet jewelry box tucked in the back corner. Inside lay a platinum watch I'd never seen, the price tag still attached. An early celebration gift for Jessica, no doubt. The sound of movement from the guest room sent me into action, everything back in place, safe closed, painting straightened. I was halfway to the door when Connor's voice froze me in place. Trouble sleeping, darling? He stood in the doorway wearing the monogrammed robe I'd given him last Christmas, his expression curious, but I caught the flash of concern in his eyes. Good. Let him worry. I was looking for aspirin, I said, gesturing to my head. Too much champagne, I suppose. In my office? His forced laugh didn't reach his eyes. Force of habit, I shrugged. I forgot you moved it to the guest bath. A pointed comment that made him shift uncomfortably. Right. Well, try to get some rest. Big day at the firm tomorrow. I slipped past him, feeling his eyes on my back. In our bedroom, I finally allowed myself to breathe. My phone felt heavy in my pocket, weighted with evidence of his betrayal. I sent a quick text to Olivia. Document secured. Meet earlier. Her response was immediate. 7 a.m. Andrew's bringing a friend. a partner from Sanderson and Blake who owes him a favor. Sanderson and Blake, our firm's biggest competitor. The significance wasn't lost on me. Sleep was impossible. I lay in bed, my mind racing through 5 years of memories, re-examining each one for signs I'd missed, the late-night calls he'd step out to take, the business trips that coincided with Jessica's court appearances in other cities, the way he'd grown protective of his computer, angling it away when emails arrived. Around dawn, I heard him leave for his morning swim, another recent habit that coincided with Jessica's early morning training sessions at the same athletic club. How many of their plans had been made during those innocent-seeming exercise routines? I dressed carefully, selecting a navy suit and ivory blouse that projected confidence and control. In the kitchen, I went through the motions of my morning routine. Brewing coffee I wouldn't drink, setting out his preferred breakfast items. The home security system I'd upgraded last month, another improvement project, would show I'd maintained our normal schedule. Olivia was already waiting when I arrived at the small coffee shop 3 blocks from Sanderson and Blake, Andrew beside her with a woman I didn't recognize. "Catherine," Olivia said, standing to hug me. "This is Eleanor Sanderson." The Eleanor Sanderson, founding partner of Sanderson and Blake and my father's most formidable opponent in the courtroom for 30 years. Eleanor's handshake was firm, her expression serious. Andrew filled me in. "You did well documenting everything last night, but we need to move fast. Men like your husband, they always have contingency plans." "Tell them what you found," Andrew urged, sliding a coffee toward me. For the next hour, I laid out everything: the hidden accounts, the forged signatures, the carefully orchestrated plan to blindside me at our own anniversary party. With each detail, Eleanor's expression grew more determined. "Classic signs of premeditated fraud," Andrew said, reviewing the photos on my phone. "The timing of the transfers, the document manipulations. He's been planning this for at least a year. And with Jessica's help, he's been positioning himself within the firm," Eleanor added. "I've heard rumors about their aggressive partnership, restructuring plans." "What do we do?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice low. "First, we protect your position. Then we gather more evidence. And finally," she smiled grimly, "we show them exactly why 3 generations of Harringtons have dominated Boston's legal landscape." As we outlined our strategy, my phone buzzed with a message from Connor. "Dinner tonight to continue celebrating our anniversary?" I showed the message to Eleanor, who nodded approvingly. "Perfect. Keep him thinking everything's normal. Meanwhile, we're going to turn their perfect plan into their worst nightmare." Looking at the small group assembled around me, Olivia's fierce loyalty, Andrew's analytical brilliance, Eleanor's strategic mind, I felt something I hadn't experienced since overhearing Connor and Jessica in my father's office: hope. Connor thought he'd orchestrated the perfect betrayal, but he'd forgotten one crucial detail about me. I wasn't just his wife of 5 years. I was a Harrington, the woman who'd graduated top of her class at Yale Law, who'd won her first major case against impossible odds, who'd learned to read people as well as she read legal statutes. And I was just getting started. As the morning light streamed through the coffee shop windows, I felt a strange sense of clarity cutting through the pain. Every case has a moment when the strategy becomes clear, when the disparate pieces of evidence suddenly form a coherent picture. This was that moment. "There's something else," I said, pulling out my phone to show them a photo I'd taken last night. "This clause here," About the client trust accounts. Connor doesn't handle trust accounts. That's Jessica's department. Eleanor studied the image, her expression sharpening. They're not just planning to divorce you and push you out. They're setting you up to take the fall for something. Financial impropriety, Andrew said, leaning in to see better. These numbers don't match standard accounting practices. They've been manipulating something. Olivia's eyes widened. Catherine, remember that audit your father mentioned last month? The one the Bar Association is conducting randomly? The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. Not just a divorce, not just a professional ousting. They were setting me up to take the blame for financial irregularities just as an external audit was approaching. The timing wasn't coincidental. They want me disbarred, I whispered, the full scope of their betrayal finally clear. Eleanor's jaw set in a hard line. This stops now. Andrew, I want you to quietly pull every trust account record from the past 18 months. Olivia, see what you can find out about this Bar Association audit. Dates, scope, who's leading it. What about me? I asked. Eleanor met my eyes with a steely gaze that had intimidated opponents for decades. You, my dear, are going to do the hardest thing of all. You're going to go to work, smile at your husband and your cousin, and pretend that your world hasn't just shattered. Can you do that? I straightened my shoulders, feeling the weight of my family name. I'm a Harrington. We don't break. We rebuild. For the first time since last night, Eleanor smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her severe features. Then let's get to work. The first battle in this war wouldn't be fought in a courtroom. It would be fought in the quiet moments, in the subtle gathering of allies, in the careful collection of evidence. Connor and Jessica had spent months building their trap. We would dismantle it piece by meticulous piece. And when we were done, they would learn why you should never, ever underestimate the woman whose name is on the building. The morning after the anniversary celebration dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the darkness that had enveloped my world. I stood by our bedroom window, watching the sunrise paint the Boston skyline in hues of gold and amber. There was something poetic about it. While my personal life was shattering, the world continued its beautiful, indifferent rotation. Eleanor Sanderson had promised to meet me at 7:30 a.m. at the small French cafe 3 blocks from my family's firm. Known for her razor-sharp legal mind and uncompromising ethics, Eleanor had been my father's most formidable courtroom opponent for decades. Now, in the cruelest twist of irony, she would become my greatest ally. Did you sleep at all? Olivia texted as I was selecting my outfit. No, I replied honestly, but neither did they. My home security system had alerted me each time Connor left the guest room during the night. 5 times he'd gone to his office, presumably making calls or sending emails, planning his next moves. Each alert had hardened my resolve. While he plotted, I prepared. I chose a crimson suit, a power color my grandmother had always favored for important court appearances. When a Harrington wears red, she'd told me during my first internship at the firm, everyone in the room knows who's in charge. Today, I needed that confidence more than ever. Andrew was already at the cafe when I arrived, spreadsheets and financial documents organized neatly before him. His methodical approach to forensic accounting had built his reputation as the go-to expert for complex financial fraud cases. I've been reviewing what you sent last night, he said without preamble. The offshore accounts are just the beginning. Look at this. He pointed to a series of transactions dating back 18 months, precisely when Jessica had been promoted to manage the firm's trust accounts. These transfers, always below reporting thresholds, created a pattern of what appears to be legitimate business expenses. But when you track them through their full cycle, he swiped to another screen, they eventually consolidate in this holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. Wild Oak Holdings, I read aloud. I've never heard of them. Because they don't exist beyond paper, Eleanor said, joining us with a coffee already in hand. She looked immaculate despite the early hour, her silver hair swept into a perfect chignon. It's a shell company. The real question is who controls it. Olivia arrived moments later with Taylor Briggs, a technology specialist who had helped her gallery implement its security systems. I can answer that, Taylor said, pulling out his laptop. I did some digging overnight. Wild Oak Holdings has 3 directors, Jessica Harrington, Connor Phillips, and this man. He turned his screen to show us a photo. Recognize him? The blood drained from my face. Judge Raymond Winters, the presiding judge of the family court division where my divorce would be filed. This isn't just about a divorce or pushing you out of the firm, Eleanor said, her voice dropping to ensure we weren't overheard. This is a systematic corruption scheme. They've compromised a sitting judge. That's why they were so confident about the timing, Andrew added. With Judge Winters presiding, the divorce would be handled exactly as they planned. The magnitude of the conspiracy unfolding before me was staggering. This went beyond personal betrayal into the realm of judicial corruption, a direct assault on the legal system my family had served for generations. We need more than just financial records, Eleanor said. We need communications, meeting notes, anything that establishes their intent and knowledge. I might be able to help with that, Taylor said cautiously. You mentioned Connor has been using the guest room computer lately. If it's connected to your home network? I understood immediately. Yes, and as the account holder for our home network, I have legal access to the router logs and network traffic. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Carefully, Catherine. We need to ensure everything we gather is admissible. I'll create a proper chain of custody documentation, Taylor assured her, and will only access what's legally permissible under network administration protocols. What about Jessica's office at the firm? Olivia asked. There must be records there. I can't access her office without raising suspicions, I said. But a memory surfaced, something my father had mentioned during a recent partners' meeting. The firm's security system was upgraded last month. All partners' offices now have always-on security cameras with cloud backup. As a named partner, my father has access to those feeds. Eleanor's smile was razor sharp. And does your father know what's happening yet? No, I admitted. I wanted to gather evidence first. Dad's relationship with his brother, Jessica's father, is complicated. I need irrefutable proof before I bring this to him. Wise, Eleanor nodded. Family dynamics can complicate legal strategies, but we'll need him eventually. First things first, Andrew interrupted, pointing to his screen. Connor has a meeting scheduled with Judge Winters today at 11:30. It's disguised as a bar association lunch, but the reservation is for a private room at the Bristol. I need to get to the office, I said, checking my watch. If Connor and Jessica see any change in my routine, they'll get suspicious. Go, Eleanor agreed. Maintain absolute normalcy. Meanwhile, we'll keep digging. Taylor will work on the network access, Andrew will continue tracing the financial web, and I'll start preparing injunctions we can file the moment we have enough evidence. Olivia squeezed my hand. I'll coordinate everything. Go be the brilliant lawyer they underestimated. As I gathered my things, Eleanor held me back for a moment. Catherine, I've faced 3 generations of Harringtons in court. Your grandfather was formidable. Your father is strategic, but you... She smiled. You have something they don't. You have the ability to appear vulnerable while being utterly dangerous. Use that. Her words stayed with me as I drove to Harrington and Associates, the firm my grandfather had built from nothing into one of Boston's most prestigious legal institutions. The 15-story building dominated its corner of the financial district. The Harrington name displayed in understated bronze lettering that nonetheless commanded respect. The security guard greeted me by name as I entered. The elevator attendant asked about my anniversary celebration, and my assistant Sophie beamed as I walked into my office suite. Happy day after anniversary, she said, handing me my usual morning coffee. The celebration looked beautiful. I saw the photos Jessica posted on the firm's social media. Of course she had, documenting the perfect event before the perfect betrayal. It was lovely, I managed, my voice neutral. What's on the schedule today? Partners meeting at 9:30, client consultation at 11 hour, and your father asked if you could review the Westlake merger documents before the end of day. Oh, and Connor left you this. She handed me a small gift bag with an envelope attached. Inside the bag was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, the scales of justice. The card read, "To many more years of perfect balance. All my love, Connor." The audacity was breathtaking. The bracelet was clearly selected to be modest enough that I wouldn't feel uncomfortable wearing it after we'd separated. Nothing like the platinum watch he'd bought for Jessica. It's beautiful, Sophie gushed. He's always so thoughtful. Yes, I said, slipping the bracelet on with a practiced smile. He certainly puts thought into everything he does. My office remained as I'd left it yesterday, case files neatly organized, family photos arranged on the credenza, law degrees and bar admissions framed on the wall. But now it all seemed like a carefully constructed set for a play whose script I hadn't been given. I texted Olivia. Bracelet delivered. Phase 1 of their plan proceeding. Her response was immediate. Taylor's already found something. Eleanor says keep smiling and watch for Connor's reaction when you see him. The partners' meeting provided the first test of my acting abilities. 20 senior partners gathered in the conference room, including my father at the head of the I table, Connor to his right, and Jessica 3 seats down. The picture of professional distance. Catherine, my father's voice carried the warmth it always had when he saw me in professional settings, pride tempered with appropriate formality. I heard the anniversary celebration was a tremendous success. Thank you, Dad. Connor and I were honored everyone could attend. I took my seat opposite Connor, meeting his eyes with a smile that revealed nothing of what I knew. He returned it with practiced ease, but I caught the slight tension around his eyes, the tell he always had when he was gauging a witness's credibility. Before we begin, my father continued, I'd like to address the upcoming Bar Association audit. As you all know, these random reviews can be disruptive, but they're essential to maintaining the profession's integrity. Jessica has been coordinating our preparation. Jessica, would you update us? Jessica rose, immaculate in a navy suit that complemented Connor's gray one, a subtle visual alignment I'd never noticed before. Thank you, Uncle Charles. The auditors will be focusing on our trust account management and client billing practices over the past 2 years. They've requested access beginning next Monday. I've prepared a detailed checklist for each department. As she spoke, I took careful notes, not of her words, but of the glances exchanged between her and Connor. The slight nod when she mentioned the timeline, the momentary eye contact when she discussed the trust accounts. These were the accounts they planned to use to discredit me, I realized. The accounts that Andrew had already identified as showing irregular transfers to Wild Oak Holdings. My phone vibrated discreetly with a text from Taylor. Found emails between C and J discussing moving evidence into your computer. Planning to plant files tonight. I kept my expression neutral, but internally, everything crystallized. Tonight was when they planned to complete their setup, downloading incriminating files onto my computer that would be discovered during the audit. As the meeting concluded, my father held me back. "A moment, Catherine?" In my office. Connor gave me a questioning look, which I answered with a reassuring smile. "Probably about the Westlake merger. I'll see you at home tonight." My father's office occupied the corner position on the top floor, a space designed to project authority while offering unparalleled views of Boston Harbor. He closed the door behind us, his expression unreadable. "The bracelet is lovely," he said, nodding toward my wrist. "Connor has good taste." "Yes, he does." He studied me for a long moment, then moved to the window. "Your grandmother wore a bracelet very similar to that one. Did I ever tell you what happened to it?" I frowned, confused by the apparent non sequitur. "No, I don't think so. She pawned it to pay for a private investigator when she suspected my father was being set up by a colleague back in 1962. He turned to face me. "The Harrington women have always had excellent instincts about betrayal." My breath caught. "Dad." He held up a hand. "I don't need details, not yet. But know this, whatever you're facing, you don't face it alone. When you're ready to tell me, I'll be ready to listen and act." Tears threatened, but I blinked them. "How did you know?" His smile was sad but proud. "You're wearing crimson. In the 15 years you've worked at this firm, you've only worn that color for 3 occasions. Your first major trial, the day you became partner, and the day you took down Hanson Industrial for fraud. It's your battle armor." I hadn't realized. He'd noticed such a detail. My father, always observing, always 3 steps ahead. "I need a little more time," I said carefully, "to gather everything necessary." "You have it. But Catherine," his expression hardened. "Remember that in chess, the queen is the most powerful piece on the board, not because she moves the fastest or makes the most noise, but because she can move in any direction necessary to protect what matters." As I left his office, I texted Olivia. "My father knows something's wrong. He's with us when we need him." Her response made me smile. For the first time that day, "The Harrington army grows. Taylor's hit the motherlode. Come now." I made an excuse about a client emergency and drove to Olivia's gallery in the South End. The back office had been transformed into a command center, laptops open, documents spread across the conference table, a digital evidence board displayed. On the large monitor normally used for showcasing artwork. "You're not going to believe this," Taylor said without looking up from his computer. "Connor's been keeping a detailed journal of their entire plan. It's password protected, but he used your wedding date. Not very original for a supposed legal genius." He turned his laptop toward me. The journal entries dated back over 2 years, beginning shortly after Jessica joined the firm. What had started as a professional collaboration had evolved into both a personal relationship and a comprehensive scheme to take control of key aspects of Harrington and Associates. But the most damning entries detailed their plan to compromise. Judge Winters threw a combination of financial incentives and blackmail regarding a past indiscretion. They hadn't just planned to use him for my divorce. They intended to have him preside over cases beneficial to clients who were secretly paying them additional fees through Wild Oak Holdings. "This isn't just about me," I said, scrolling through the entries. "They're corrupting the entire judicial process." "Which makes this a criminal matter," Eleanor confirmed, joining us. "The FBI's Public Corruption Unit would be very interested in this evidence. But we need to be strategic about when and how we involve federal authorities," Andrew cautioned. "Once that happens, we lose control of the timing." "And timing is everything," I murmured, remembering Connor's meticulous planning. "They expect to plant evidence on my computer tonight, follow through with the divorce filing after the audit begins, and have Judge Winters ensure I'm not only divorced, but professionally ruined." "So we create our own timeline," Olivia suggested, "one they don't see coming." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "We need a three-pronged approach: legal, professional, and personal. We know Connor has a meeting with Judge Winters in—" I checked my watch. 40 minutes. What if we had someone there? Someone who could document their interaction without alerting them? "I know just the person," Olivia said, already dialing. "My gallery's photographer owes me a favor. He's done surveillance work before." While she arranged that, Andrew continued his analysis of the financial records. "The money trail is complex but clear once you know what you're looking for. They've been skimming from trust accounts, but cleverly replacing the funds before monthly reconciliations. The only way to catch it is to analyze the daily transactions, which standard audits don't do. But the Bar Association audit might, I realized, if they're thorough enough. Which is why they needed a sympathetic judge in place before the audit," Taylor added. "And why they're planting evidence on your computer. They need a scapegoat when the discrepancies are eventually discovered." The pieces were falling into place, each revelation more disturbing than the last. This wasn't just a betrayal of me as a wife or even as a colleague. This was a calculated corruption of the legal system itself, using my family's firm as the vehicle. "Eleanor," I said slowly, "how quickly can you prepare an emergency injunction?" "Depends on the grounds," she replied. "What are you thinking?" "I want to freeze the Wild Oak Holdings accounts before they can move any more money. And I want to secure a temporary restraining order preventing Connor and Jessica from accessing my home or office computers." Eleanor's eyes gleamed with approval. "With the evidence we've collected, I can have both ready by end of day. But," she cautioned, "the moment we file, they'll know we're on to them." "Not if we file under seal," I countered. "And have the orders served simultaneously to both of them, the bank and Judge Winters." "Bold," Eleanor acknowledged, "but not without risk. If Judge Winters is as compromised as it appears, he might alert them. That's why we need to involve the FBI," I said, "but on our timeline, not theirs." Taylor raised his hand like a student. "I may have a solution for tonight's problem, the evidence planting. I can create a honeypot on your home network. It'll look like your computer, but actually be a segregated virtual environment. Anything they upload will be captured and traced without affecting your actual system." "Can you set that up without them knowing you've been there?" Andrew asked. "Already have remote access," Taylor confirmed. "I'll need about an hour." Olivia returned, her expression triumphant. Photographers in position. He'll send images directly to my secure server. The next few hours passed in a blur of strategic planning. Eleanor drafted the legal documents, Andrew prepared financial affidavits, Taylor set up the honeypot system, and Olivia coordinated the surveillance. Each person brought unique skills to the effort, their collaboration creating something powerful. I was reminded of something my grandfather had written in his memoir about founding Harrington and Associates. The law is not merely about knowing statutes and precedents, it's about building the right team for each battle, people whose diverse talents combine to create something greater than any individual could accomplish alone. At 2:17 p.m., Olivia's phone pinged with incoming photos. Connor and Judge Winters in the private dining room at the Bristol, heads bent close together over documents. Jessica arriving separately, being escorted to their table. The three of them clearly comfortable together, not the formal relationship of attorneys and judge, but of conspirators sharing a common purpose. "We have them," Eleanor said softly. "These photos, combined with the financial records and journal entries, establish a pattern of judicial misconduct that no court can ignore." My phone rang, Connor's name flashing on the screen. I answered, keeping my voice casual. "Hey, how's your day going?" "Busy," he replied, the background noise suggesting he was already leaving the restaurant. "Listen, I might be home late tonight. The Westlake merger has some complications." The Westlake merger? His code with Jessica for their scheme, I now realized. "No problem," I said. "I have plenty to review anyway. The Bar Association audit preparations are keeping everyone busy." A momentary pause, so brief anyone else might have missed it. "Right, the audit. Don't work too hard, darling." After I hung up, Eleanor fixed me with a calculating look. "You're remarkably composed for someone whose entire personal and professional life is under attack." I considered her observation. When I was 12, my grandfather took me to watch him argue before the Supreme Court. Afterward, he told me something I never forgot. "Catherine, fear and anger are luxuries a good lawyer cannot afford. They cloud judgment precisely when clarity is most essential." "Wise man?" Eleanor nodded. "And you're your grandfather's granddaughter." "No," I corrected her with a grim smile. "I'm better. He never had to face betrayal from within his own family." Andrew looked up from his calculations. "The total amount diverted through Wild Oak Holdings exceeds $4, $2 million. If we can freeze the accounts today, we'll capture most of it." Eleanor checked her watch. "Judge Harriman owes me a favor. She can sign these orders within the hour if we hurry." "Go," I urged. "I need to return to the office before my absence raises questions. Taylor, make sure the honeypot is ready. And Olivia." "I know," she assured me. "I'll coordinate everything." "While you keep up appearances." As I prepared to leave, Eleanor stopped me. "Catherine, once these orders are served, everything changes. Connor and Jessica will know they've been discovered. They'll be desperate, and desperate people make dangerous choices." "I understand the risk," I assured her. "But I won't let them destroy my family's legacy or corrupt the justice system we've dedicated our lives to upholding." Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "It's not just about the firm or even the judicial system, though, is it? Despite everything, there's personal pain here. I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge the emotional aspect of Connor's betrayal, the death of what I'd thought was a loving marriage, the humiliation of his affair with my own cousin, the knowledge that for years The man sharing my bed had been plotting my downfall. Yes, I admitted quietly. There's pain, but pain can be channeled into purpose, and right now, my purpose is absolutely clear. As I drove back to Harrington and Associates, I rehearsed what would happen next. By 5 p.m., the injunctions would be signed. By 6 p.m., they would be served. By 7 p.m., Connor and Jessica would realize their plan had failed. And by 8 p.m., they would be facing not just divorce proceedings but potential criminal charges. The carefully constructed trap they had set for me was about to become their own prison. And unlike them, I would ensure that justice, true justice, was served. Because while they had been plotting my professional execution, they had forgotten the most important lesson any Harrington learned from birth. Never underestimate an opponent with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. The emergency injunctions were signed by Judge Harriman at precisely 4:43 p.m., a moment I would later mark as the turning point in this entire ordeal. Eleanor had worked her legal magic, presenting our evidence so compellingly that the judge not only granted our requests but added additional protections we hadn't even considered. All Wild Oak Holdings accounts are frozen, effective immediately, Eleanor confirmed, her voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of a chess master calling checkmate. And the temporary restraining orders preventing Connor and Jessica from accessing any of your electronic devices have been expedited for service tonight. We gathered at Eleanor's office, away from both my home and Harrington and Associates, to finalize our counter-strategy. The sleek conference room overlooked the Charles River, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the water, a visual reminder of how quickly daylight was fading on Connor and Jessica's scheme. Taylor's honeypot is active, Andrew reported, looking up from his laptop. If they try to plant evidence on your home computer tonight, we'll capture everything: the files, their digital signatures, the exact time of placement. It's the equivalent of catching someone with their hand in the cookie jar. Olivia's photographer had delivered stunning evidence of Connor's meeting with Judge Winters and Jessica. The images were damning, documents being exchanged, money visibly changing hands, all in a supposedly casual lunch meeting. We've got 4 process servers standing by, Eleanor said, checking her watch. Connor will be served at home, Jessica at her apartment, Judge Winters at his chambers, and the bank's legal department downtown, all simultaneously at 6:30 p.m. What about my father? I asked. It's time to bring him in fully. Eleanor nodded. I agree. This goes beyond you now. It involves the integrity of the entire firm. The decision to finally reveal everything to my father wasn't easy. Not because I doubted his support, but because I knew the pain it would cause him. Jessica wasn't just my cousin, she was his niece, his brother's daughter. The betrayal would ripple through our entire family structure. I'll call him now, I said, stepping away from the group. My father answered on the second ring. Catherine, I was just thinking about you. Dad, I need you to come to Eleanor Sanderson's office. There's something you need to see. I kept my voice steady, professional. A pause. Eleanor Sanderson? That's unexpected company for you to keep. It'll make sense when you get here. And Dad? I hesitated. Come alone. Tell no one where you're going. To his credit, he asked no further questions. I'll be there in 20 minutes. While we waited, I reviewed the final piece of our strategy, the press statement. Connor and Jessica had planned to humiliate me both personally and professionally. They'd intended to use the legal system, my family's firm, and public perception against me. Now, we would control the narrative. The statement needs to be factual, not emotional, Eleanor advised. Focus on the financial impropriety and judicial misconduct, not the personal betrayal. Agreed, I said, reviewing the draft. But we need to make it clear this was discovered through legitimate investigation, not bitter retaliation. Speaking of which, Andrew interjected, the FBI agents will be here at 7:30 p.m. They're very interested in the judicial corruption angle. The door opened and my father entered. He took in the scene, the evidence boards, the legal documents, the team of experts assembled, and his expression grew grave. "You've been busy," he said quietly, his eyes finding mine. "Dad, you should sit down." For the next 30 minutes, we walked him through everything: Connor and Jessica's affair, their plan to force me out of the firm, the falsified documents, the offshore accounts, and finally, the judicial corruption involving Judge Winters. With each revelation, my father's face grew more thunderous, the legendary Harrington temper visibly building behind his controlled exterior. When we finished, he sat in silence for a long moment, his hands steepled before him in a gesture I'd seen thousands of times in the courtroom. It was how he processed, how he calculated his next move. "The depth of this conspiracy," he finally said, his voice deceptively calm, "goes beyond personal betrayal. They've attacked the very foundation of our legal system, the trust between lawyer and client, the integrity of the judiciary, the ethical principles our firm was built upon." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "Jessica is my brother's daughter. I've known her since birth, mentored her through law school, championed her career." He turned back to face us. "And Connor, I treated him like a son." "I'm sorry, Dad," I said softly. His expression softened momentarily. "You have nothing to apologize for, Catherine. Nothing." Then his lawyer's mask returned. "What's our next move?" Eleanor smiled slightly. "The injunctions have been signed. Service happens at 6:30 p.m., approximately 10 minutes from now." My father checked his watch, then nodded decisively. "Good. And after that?" "The FBI will take statements regarding the judicial corruption," I explained. "Then tomorrow morning, we call an emergency partners meeting." "No," my father countered. "Not tomorrow. Tonight. Every senior partner, executive committee member, and department head. 9 p.m. at the firm." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That's aggressive timing. This isn't just about Catherine's marriage or even about the firm's finances," my father replied. "This is about the soul of Harrington and Associates. We face it head-on, immediately." His unwavering certainty reminded me of why Charles Harrington was legendary in legal circles. He understood that in crisis, hesitation was fatal. Decisive action wasn't just strategic, it was necessary. "There's one more thing," I said carefully. "We need to contact Uncle Richard." My father's expression tightened. Richard Harrington, Jessica's father, and my father's younger brother, was a senior partner who managed the firm's West Coast operations. The brothers had a complex relationship, competitive yet loyal, distant yet bound by family obligation. "I'll call him," my father decided. "He deserves to hear this from me." At precisely 6:30 p.m., our phones began lighting up with confirmation messages from the process servers. Connor served at our home. Jessica served at her apartment. Judge Winters served in his chambers. The bank's legal department served downtown. The first response came almost immediately, a furious call from Connor that I declined with a swipe of my finger. Then Jessica, whose voicemail I listened to on speaker. "Catherine, this is absolutely ridiculous. These allegations are completely unfounded, and you're only embarrassing yourself with these desperate tactics. Call me immediately so we can resolve this misunderstanding." Her voice carried none of the panic or anger I'd expected, only condescension and feigned concern. She still believed she held the upper hand. Judge Winter's reaction was more revealing. He called Eleanor directly, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "Ms. Sanderson, there's been a terrible mistake. I've been served with injunctions, based on what I can only assume are fabricated allegations. I think we should discuss this privately before irreparable damage is done." Eleanor's response was coolly professional. "Judge Winters, as you're now the subject of a federal investigation, I strongly advise you to contact your personal attorney rather than attempting to communicate with opposing counsel. Good evening." As she hung up, my father nodded with approval. Direct, appropriate, devastating. The bank was the only party that didn't immediately respond. Financial institutions typically referred such matters to their legal departments for proper review before taking any action. At 7:05 p.m., Taylor announced, "They're trying to access your home computer system right now. The honeypot is capturing everything." We watched in real time as Connor and Jessica, both now at my home despite the restraining order, attempted to upload falsified financial records to my personal computer. The files were designed to make it appear that I had been the one diverting client trust funds, creating a perfect scapegoat for their scheme. "This is better than we could have hoped," Andrew said, recording everything. "They're violating the restraining order and committing computer fraud simultaneously." "I've alerted the police," Eleanor added calmly. "They should be arriving at your home shortly." My phone buzzed with a text from Connor. "Catherine, we need to talk, now. This misunderstanding can be resolved without damaging both our reputations." I showed it to my father, who actually laughed, a short, grim sound. "A misunderstanding. That's what he calls 2 years of conspiracy, fraud, and judicial corruption." "Should I respond?" I asked. Eleanor considered. "Yes, but carefully. Keep him engaged until the police arrive." I typed, "I'm in a meeting. What misunderstanding do you mean?" His response was immediate. "These ridiculous injunctions. You're overreacting to something you've misinterpreted. Come home so we can talk privately." Before I could reply, Taylor announced, "Police have arrived at your house. Connor and Jessica are being detained for violating the restraining order." At 7:30 p.m. sharp, 2 FBI agents arrived at Eleanor's office. A man and woman in impeccable suits who carried themselves with the quiet authority of federal law enforcement. They introduced themselves as Special Agents Morales and Chen from the Public Corruption Unit. "We've reviewed the preliminary evidence Ms. Sanderson provided," Agent Morales began, "and we find the allegations of judicial misconduct credible, enough to open a formal investigation." Over the next hour, they took detailed statements from each of us, particularly focusing on the documented meetings between Connor, Jessica, and Judge Winters, the financial trails Andrew had uncovered, and the communications Taylor had recovered. "The scope of this conspiracy is concerning," Agent Chen noted as she reviewed the evidence. "It suggests a systematic attempt to corrupt judicial proceedings beyond just your divorce case, Ms. Harrington." "That's our assessment as well," Eleanor confirmed. "The Wild Oak holding structure appears designed for ongoing influence, not a one-time situation." As the agents prepared to leave, Agent Morales addressed my father directly. "Mr. Harrington, given your firm's reputation and standing, we appreciate your cooperation in this matter. This couldn't have been easy." My father's response was measured. "When it comes to the integrity of the legal system, there are no easy choices, only necessary ones." Once the FBI departed, we turned our attention to the emergency partners. Meeting scheduled for 9 p.m. My father had already sent the notification, citing only an urgent matter affecting firm integrity as the reason. "How do you want to handle this?" I asked him. He considered carefully. "Factually, directly, without emotion. We present the evidence, announce the immediate suspension of both Connor and Jessica pending further investigation, and implement emergency protocols for client protection." "And Uncle Richard?" Pain flickered across my father's features. "He's flying in tonight. He should land just before the meeting starts." The gravity of the situation struck me anew. My uncle was cutting short a business trip to fly across the country for an emergency meeting called with only hours' notice. The Harrington family was closing ranks, not to protect their own, but to protect what 3 generations had built. Eleanor offered to accompany us to the partners' meeting, but my father declined graciously. "This is a family matter now, Eleanor, but your counsel has been invaluable." "Remember," she advised as we prepared to leave, "stay focused on the facts. Let the evidence speak for itself. The personal aspects, the affair, the betrayal, those are secondary to the professional misconduct and criminal behavior." "She's right," my father agreed. "This isn't about a failed marriage or family betrayal. It's about upholding the principles of justice our firm was founded upon." As we drove to Harrington and Associates, the city lights reflected off the rain-slicked streets, creating shimmering pathways ahead of us. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. After darkness and storm, clarity and reflection. "Are you ready for this?" my father asked quietly. I thought about everything that had happened in the past 24 hours, discovering my husband's betrayal, unraveling the conspiracy, building our counter-strategy, and now, facing the firm's leadership. "Yes," I said with certainty. "This isn't how I expected to make my mark on the firm, but perhaps it's fitting. Grandfather always said the true measure of a Harrington isn't how we handle success, but how we confront betrayal." My father smiled slightly. "He would be proud of you, Catherine, as am I." The Harrington and Associates building was unusually active for 8:45 p.m. Security had been enhanced at my father's request, and partners were already arriving, their faces showing mixtures of confusion, concern, and curiosity. My assistant, Sophie, met us in the lobby, her expression worried. "Catherine, Connor's been calling the office repeatedly, and Jessica's father has been trying to reach you as well." "Thank you, Sophie," I said calmly. "Please let them know we'll address everything at the meeting." The main conference room was prepared with meticulous attention to detail, copies of key evidence laid at each seat, the digital presentation ready, security positioned discreetly at each entrance. Partners began filing in, the room's atmosphere growing tense with speculation. These were some of Boston's most accomplished attorneys, perceptive, analytical minds who sensed something momentous was about to occur. At 8:58 p.m., my Uncle Richard arrived, looking travel-worn but alert. He embraced my father briefly, then approached me. "Catherine," he said, his expression grave. "Charles wouldn't tell me details over the phone, but he mentioned it involved Jessica. "What's happening?" "We're about to explain everything, Uncle Richard. Please, take your seat." As the clock struck 9 p.m., my father called the meeting to order. 27 senior partners, the entire executive committee, and all department heads were present, essentially the full leadership of Harrington and Associates. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," my father began. "I've called this emergency meeting to address a serious breach of professional ethics, fiduciary responsibility, and possibly criminal conduct involving two partners of this firm." The room fell silent, all eyes focused intently on my father. Before I continue, I want to make something absolutely clear. What you're about to hear will be disturbing. It will challenge your faith in colleagues you've trusted. But Harrington and Associates was built on principles that transcend any individual. Principles of integrity, justice, and unwavering ethical conduct. He nodded to me, and I stood, taking my place beside him. "Yesterday evening," I began, my voice steady, "I discovered evidence that my husband, Connor Phillips, and my cousin, Jessica Harrington, have been engaged in a systematic conspiracy to manipulate client trust accounts, compromise judicial proceedings, and defraud both our clients and this firm." For the next 40 minutes, we presented the evidence methodically. The financial trails, the falsified documents, the offshore accounts, the judicial corruption, and finally, their attempted evidence tampering captured by Taylor's honeypot just hours earlier. Throughout the presentation, the room remained eerily silent, broken only by occasional sharp intakes of breath as particularly damning evidence was revealed. My Uncle Richard's face had gone ashen, his hands gripping the table edge with white-knuckled intensity. When we concluded, my father addressed the room again. "As of this evening, Connor Phillips and Jessica Harrington have been served with injunctions freezing their assets. The FBI has opened an investigation into judicial misconduct involving Judge Raymond Winters. The Bar Association has been notified, and we've implemented emergency protocols to protect client funds." One of the senior partners, Elena Vasquez, raised her hand. "What about our clients? The potential exposure here is enormous." "We've already begun a comprehensive audit," my father replied. "Preliminary findings suggest the actual client impact may be limited. They were careful to replace funds before regular audits. However, we will be completely transparent with our clients and make any necessary restitution from firm reserves." Another partner spoke up. "And the firm's reputation? This could be devastating if handled poorly." "Which is why we're addressing it head-on," I interjected. "By taking immediate, decisive action, we demonstrate that while individual lawyers may fail, Harrington and Associates' commitment to justice remains uncompromised. We aren't hiding from this. We're confronting it." My Uncle Richard finally spoke. His voice strained. "I need to understand. Jessica is my daughter. How could this happen without any of us seeing it?" The room fell silent again, the personal dimension of the crisis suddenly front and center. My father answered gently but firmly. "Richard, they were extraordinarily careful. They used our trust in them, as family, as colleagues, as a shield against scrutiny. But that doesn't change what they've done or what we must do now." The discussion continued for another hour. Practical questions about client management, press strategy, staff communications, and necessary structural changes to prevent similar breaches in the future. Throughout it all, I remained focused, professional, and determined. This wasn't just about my personal vindication. It was about preserving the legacy of Harrington and Associates and protecting the clients who depended on us. As the meeting concluded, my father made one final statement. Tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., we reconvene to implement our response plan. By then, news of the FBI investigation will likely be public. Remember, we act with integrity, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to justice. That is who we are. That is who we have always been. After the partners departed, only my father, Uncle Richard, and I remained in the conference room. The silence between us held decades of family history, professional accomplishment, and now, painful betrayal. "I need to see her," Uncle Richard finally said. "I need to hear Jessica's explanation." "Richard," my father began cautiously. "Not to excuse her actions," my uncle clarified, "but to understand. She's still my daughter, Charles." I understood his pain. Despite everything Jessica had done, the bonds of family remained, complicated and strained but not entirely broken. "The FBI will be questioning her tomorrow," I said gently. "You might want to ensure she has appropriate legal representation. Not from our firm, obviously." My uncle nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Catherine. Despite everything she's done to you, you're still thinking clearly. That's the mark of a true Harrington." After he left, my father and I stood looking out over the Boston skyline, the city lights a constellation of possibility against the night sky. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," my father said with quiet certainty, "we rebuild. Not just the systems they compromised or the relationships they damaged, but the trust that was broken. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but it's necessary." I thought about Connor, the man I had loved, the future we had planned, the life we had shared. All of it based on calculation and deception rather than genuine connection. "You know what's strange?" I said. "I feel oddly liberated. For months something felt wrong, but I couldn't identify it. Now, even amid this crisis, there's clarity." My father smiled slightly. "Your grandmother used to say that the truth, however painful, is always preferable to the most comforting lie." She was right. As we prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. "Connor and Jessica released on bail. FBI continuing investigation. Judge Winters suspended pending judicial review. You did well today. Tomorrow will be challenging, but you've already overcome the hardest part." She was right. The initial shock had passed. The immediate crisis had been contained. What remained was the meticulous work of reconstruction, building something stronger and more transparent from the ruins of betrayal. And for the first time since overhearing Connor and Jessica in my father's office, I felt a surge of genuine optimism. This wasn't just about surviving a personal and professional attack. It was about transforming it into something meaningful. "Dad," I said as we walked to the elevator, "I've been thinking about what comes next. Not just damage control, but positive change. What if we used this as an opportunity to establish a new ethics initiative, a foundation that supports judicial integrity and legal ethics education?" He considered the idea, his expression thoughtful. "Creating something constructive from this situation." "I like it. The Harrington Ethics Initiative?" "Exactly. We turn this painful chapter into a force for positive change in the legal community." As the elevator doors closed, I caught our reflection in the polished metal. Father and daughter, united by principle and purpose despite the storm around us. The Harrington legacy wouldn't be defined by Connor and Jessica's betrayal, but by how we responded to it. And my response would be to build something better, stronger, and more impactful than what they had tried to destroy. Because that's what resilience truly means, not just surviving adversity, but using it as a catalyst for growth and transformation. The darkness of betrayal had tried to extinguish my light. Instead, it had only made it burn more brightly, illuminating a path forward that I might never have discovered otherwise. 1 month after exposing Connor and Jessica's conspiracy, I stood on the steps of the federal courthouse, watching as camera flashes illuminated the overcast morning. The media presence had been relentless since the story broke. Not just local coverage, but national outlets fascinated by the tale of judicial corruption, legal betrayal, and family drama that seemed pulled from a screenplay rather than real life. "Ms. Harrington, can you comment on today's indictments?" a reporter called out as I descended the steps beside Eleanor. "The United States Attorney will be making a statement shortly," I replied with practiced composure. "I'm here today as a witness to these proceedings, not as a commentator." Eleanor guided me through the press barricade with the efficiency of someone who had navigated media storms many times before. Our car waited across the street, driver standing at attention, beside the open door. "You handled that beautifully," she remarked once we were safely inside. Dignified, professional, no hint of personal satisfaction despite what must be considerable vindication. I watched the courthouse recede through the window, thinking about what had just transpired inside. A federal grand jury had returned. Indictments against Connor, Jessica, and Judge Winters on 27 counts, including racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and judicial corruption. The case that had begun as my personal tragedy had expanded into one of the most significant legal ethics scandals in Boston's recent history. "It's not about vindication," I said finally. "It's about consequences. Every action creates ripples, whether we see them immediately or not." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Your grandfather used to say something similar in court. Justice may arrive on different schedules, but its appointments are never canceled." "You knew my grandfather well?" I asked, surprised. Eleanor had never mentioned this connection before. "We opposed each other in 17 cases over 20 years, she smiled. "He was formidable, brilliant, ethical, occasionally infuriating. After particularly contentious trials, we sometimes shared a drink. He'd toast to worthy opponents and remind me that the law works best when both sides bring their strongest arguments to the table." The revelation added another dimension to my understanding of the Harrington legacy, my grandfather finding common ground with his adversaries, recognizing that principled opposition strengthened rather than weakened the legal system. "He would have admired your handling of this situation," Eleanor continued, "particularly your focus on systemic reform rather than personal retribution." The Harrington Ethics Initiative had moved from concept to reality with remarkable speed. Using funds recovered from the Wild Oak Holdings accounts, we had established a foundation dedicated to strengthening judicial ethics, promoting transparency in legal proceedings, and supporting whistleblowers who exposed corruption within the justice system. "The first ethics summit is scheduled for next month," I reminded her. "We're hoping you'll deliver the keynote address." "I'd be honored," Eleanor replied, "though I suspect your father might be the more appropriate choice, given the circumstances." I shook my head. "Dad's focusing on rebuilding the firm. Besides, the initiative needs to be bigger than just the Harrington family. It needs voices like yours, Respected adversaries who understand that integrity transcends personal or professional loyalties. My phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. CNN covering the indictments. Your father's statement is perfect. Call when you're free. The car pulled up to Eleanor's offices, where we would meet with Andrew to review the final forensic accounting reports before submitting them to the Department of Justice. The investigation had expanded significantly, uncovering a pattern of judicial manipulation extending beyond Judge Winters to 2 other judges and several court officials. "Catherine," Eleanor said as we prepared to exit the car, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you. With everything settled on the legal front, have you given thought to what comes next for you personally?" The question caught me off guard. For the past month, I'd been so focused on the investigation, the firm's stability, and launching the ethics initiative that I'd had little time to consider my own future beyond these immediate concerns. "I suppose I haven't," I admitted. "There's been so much to address." "Precisely why you should be thinking about it," Eleanor replied. "Crisis response is necessary but not sustainable as a life strategy. At some point, you need to move from reaction to intention." Her words stayed with me throughout the afternoon meeting with Andrew, whose meticulous financial analysis had been crucial in building the federal case. The recovered funds now totaled nearly $6. $3 million. Significantly more than our initial estimates, and suggesting the conspiracy had been even more profitable than we'd realized. "The prosecutors are particularly interested in this transaction structure," Andrew explained, highlighting a complex diagram. "It appears Connor and Jessica were creating a template they plan to replicate with other judges beyond the family court division." The scope was always bigger than my divorce case, I noted. They saw that as just the beginning, a proof of concept for a larger corruption scheme. "Exactly," Andrew confirmed, which explains the federal prosecutor's enthusiasm for this case. It's not just about 3 corrupt individuals, it's about preventing a systematic subversion of judicial integrity. After the meeting concluded, I found myself alone in Eleanor's conference room, standing by the windows overlooking the Charles River. The water flowed steadily beneath the afternoon sun, constant and purposeful in its journey. My phone rang, my father calling from the firm. "The partners' vote was unanimous," he said without preamble. "The succession plan has been approved. When you're ready, the managing partner position is yours." The offer represented everything I'd worked toward professionally, leading Harrington and Associates into its 4th generation, taking the firm my grandfather had founded and my father had expanded into a new era. Yet I found myself hesitating. "Dad, I need to think about this," I said carefully. "Given everything that's happened." "Of course," he replied, his tone understanding. "This isn't a decision to be rushed. But Catherine, don't let what Connor and Jessica did determine your future. That would be giving them power they don't deserve." After we hung up, I called Olivia, who had become my closest confidant throughout this ordeal. "The firm's offered me the managing partner position," I told her. "That's incredible!" she exclaimed. "Though not surprising. You've demonstrated extraordinary leadership these past weeks." "I'm not sure if it's what I want anymore," I admitted. "Or at least, not in the same way I wanted it before." "Which is perfectly natural," Olivia assured me. "Profound betrayal changes us, not just our circumstances, but our perspectives, priorities, even our ambitions." Eleanor said something similar earlier, about moving from reaction to intention. "Smart woman. What does your intention tell?" You? I considered the question carefully. That I need space to rediscover who I am beyond this crisis. Beyond being Connor's betrayed wife or Charles Harrington's daughter or the firm's heir apparent. Then take that space, Olivia said simply. The firm has survived for 3 generations. It can wait a little longer for your decision. That evening, I returned to the house I had once shared with Connor, now solely mine after the divorce settlement. I'd changed very little about the space, partly due to lack of time, but also from a reluctance to invest emotional energy in a place that held so many tainted memories. As I moved through the quiet rooms, I realized it was time for more decisive changes. Not just redecorating, but reimagining my life's physical foundation. This house represented a chapter that had closed. Painfully, yes, but definitively. I made a spontaneous decision, calling a real estate agent I knew from the firm's client roster. Jennifer, it's Catherine Harrington. I'd like to list my house. And I'm interested in looking at apartments in Beacon Hill, preferably with a view of the water. After making arrangements to meet the agent the following day, I felt a surge of liberation. The house had been Connor's choice, selected more for its proximity to the firm and impression on colleagues than for any features I had particularly valued. My new home would reflect my preferences, my priorities, my emerging sense of self. The next morning, I met with my father at the firm, purposely arriving before regular office hours to ensure our conversation would be private. I've decided to take a sabbatical, I told him directly. 6 months, possibly longer. To his credit, he showed no disappointment, only thoughtful consideration. To do what, exactly? First, to fully establish the ethics initiative. It needs dedicated attention to truly fulfill its potential. Second, to teach a semester at Harvard Law on professional ethics and institutional accountability. And third, I added with newfound certainty, to write the book I've been considering for years about the evolution of legal ethics in family practice. My father leaned back in his chair, studying me with the penetrating gaze that had intimidated countless witnesses but had always made me feel deeply seen and understood. You've given this considerable thought, he observed. I have. The managing partner position will always be there if I decide it's truly what I want. But this moment, this opportunity to transform a personal trauma into something beneficial for the entire legal community, won't come again. He nodded slowly. Your grandfather would approve. He always believed our greatest obligation was not to the firm itself, but to the principles it was founded to uphold. Does that mean you support my decision? My father smiled, a genuine expression that softened the lines of his face. Catherine, in the past month you've demonstrated more wisdom, courage, and vision than most attorneys develop in a lifetime. I don't just support your decision, I admire it. The relief I felt confirmed I was making the right choice, not rejecting the Harrington legacy, but honoring it in a different, perhaps more profound way than simply ascending to the position that had been prepared for me. 3 days later, I submitted my formal request for sabbatical to the partners committee, who approved it unanimously with expressions of support that touched me deeply. Many noted that the ethics initiative represented exactly the kind of leadership the legal community needed, not just managing a successful practice, but actively working to improve the system itself. The following week brought Connor and Jessica's arraignment, an event I chose not to attend in person despite its significance. Their not guilty pleas were expected, though the evidence against them was substantial enough that their attorneys were already exploring plea deal possibilities. Instead of watching my former husband in court, I spent that day meeting with the newly appointed board of the Harrington Ethics Initiative, a diverse group including judges, law professors, and practitioners from various specialties. Together, we finalized the mission statement that would guide our work: to promote, protect, and preserve the ethical foundations of our legal system through education, advocacy, and reform, ensuring that justice remains accessible, transparent, and incorruptible for all who seek it. That evening, I moved into my new apartment, a bright, airy space in a historic Beacon Hill building with views of the Charles River. Unlike the house Connor and I had shared, with its formal styling and calculated impression, this space felt authentically mine. I had furnished it simply but thoughtfully, creating an environment that fostered clarity and peace rather than projection and performance. As I unpacked books in my new home office, I came across a volume my grandfather had given me when I passed the bar examination, his own annotated copy of Legal Ethics in Modern Practice. Inside the cover, he had written words I now read with fresh appreciation. Catherine, remember always that the law is not merely a profession, but a sacred trust. Our clients place in our hands their freedom, their futures, their faith in justice itself. Guard that trust as your most precious possession, for once broken, it is almost impossible to restore. With great pride in who you are and who you will become, Grandfather. Those words, written years before I would face the ultimate test of my ethical foundations, seemed almost prophetic now. Connor and Jessica had broken that sacred trust, not just with me, but with the entire legal system they had sworn to uphold. I had chosen a different path, using the painful experience to strengthen rather than compromise my commitment to justice. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from my Uncle Richard, Jessica's father, who had maintained a careful distance since the scandal broke. After an initial period of disbelief and denial, he had eventually accepted the evidence of his daughter's actions, though our interactions remained constrained by mutual pain. Catherine, he began, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who had aged years in mere months. I'm calling about the Ethics Initiative. I'd like to make a contribution, anonymously if possible. The offer surprised me. That's very generous, Uncle Richard. May I ask what prompted this? He was silent for a moment. I've been doing a lot of reflecting. About Jessica, about the firm, about our family. I failed somewhere in teaching her the values that should have guided her choices. Perhaps supporting your work can help ensure others don't make similar mistakes. His words reflected a profound accountability that moved me deeply. Your contribution would be welcome, anonymous or not. This isn't about assigning blame. It's about creating something constructive from a painful situation. You've shown remarkable grace throughout this ordeal, he said softly. I'm not sure I could have done the same in your position. We never know what we're capable of until we're tested, I replied. And I've had excellent examples of principled leadership in my life, including you, Uncle Richard. After we ended the call, I felt a sense of healing that transcended the personal vindication of the federal indictments or the professional affirmation of the sabbatical approval. Richard's gesture represented something more profound, the possibility that even the deepest wounds could become sources of connection rather than division. 2 weeks later, I delivered my first guest lecture at Harvard Law School, addressing a packed auditorium of students eager to hear about the case that had dominated legal news. Rather than focusing on the sensational elements, I structured my presentation around the systemic vulnerabilities that had allowed the corruption to flourish undetected. The most dangerous ethical breaches don't announce themselves with dramatic gestures, I told the attentive audience. They begin with small compromises, subtle boundary violations, minor rationalizations. By the time they grow into full-blown corruption, the participants have normalized behaviors that would have been unthinkable to them initially. A student raised her hand. Given your experience, do you believe the legal system is fundamentally flawed? That corruption is inevitable? Quite the opposite, I replied. What happened in this case demonstrates not the failure of our legal system, but its resilience. When corruption was discovered, mechanisms existed to address it. Injunctions were granted. Investigations were launched. Indictments were returned. The system worked, albeit imperfectly and often too slowly. But it required extraordinary effort on your part, another student pointed out. Most people wouldn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back as effectively. Which is precisely why the ethics initiative exists, I acknowledged. To strengthen those mechanisms, make them more accessible, and ensure they function for everyone, not just those with legal training or financial resources. The goal isn't perfection, it's persistent improvement. After the lecture, several students approached to discuss internship possibilities with the initiative. Their enthusiasm reminded me that despite the cynicism often associated with legal practice, many entered the profession with genuine idealism and commitment to justice, qualities that needed nurturing rather than discouragement. That weekend, I met Olivia for brunch at a cafe overlooking Boston Harbor. The early autumn air carried a crisp energy that matched my growing sense of possibility and purpose. You seem different, she observed, studying me over her coffee cup. More centered somehow. I feel different, I admitted. For months, I was defined by what happened to me. The betrayal, the conspiracy, the public exposure. Everything was a reaction to Connor and Jessica's actions. Now, finally, I'm making choices that aren't shaped by them at all. That's the true victory, Olivia smiled. Not the indictments or the professional recognition, but reclaiming your agency. Exactly. The sabbatical, the new apartment, the ethics initiative, they're all expressions of who I want to be, not responses to what was done to me. As we lingered over our meal, I shared with Olivia my evolving vision for the future, not just the immediate projects of the sabbatical, but longer-term aspirations that had begun to crystallize. I'm considering running for the State Bar Association presidency next year, I confided. Using that platform to implement some of the reforms we're developing through the initiative. That's a significant shift from firm management, Olivia noted. More public, more policy-focused, and potentially more impactful, I added. Managing Harrington and Associates would mean preserving and extending a respected institution. Important work, certainly. But this path could actually transform aspects of the legal system that have remained resistant to change for generations. From crisis to catalyst, Olivia mused. It's remarkable how the worst experiences sometimes unlock possibilities we might never have discovered otherwise. Her observation resonated deeply. Connor and Jessica's betrayal, designed to destroy me professionally and personally, had instead propelled me toward a purpose that felt more aligned with my values and capabilities than the path I'd been following before. Later that month, I received a letter from Judge Winters, now suspended from the bench and awaiting trial. His attorneys had likely advised against such communication, making its arrival all the more surprising. Ms. Harrington, it began formally. While legal proceedings continue regarding my actions, I feel compelled to offer a personal acknowledgement of the harm caused by my participation in the conspiracy involving your husband and cousin. No justification exists for compromising the judicial office entrusted to me, and I have begun the difficult process of accepting full responsibility for my failures. The letter continued with reflections on how incremental ethical compromises had led to increasingly serious violations, exactly the pattern I had described to the Harvard students. He concluded by expressing support for the ethics initiative, offering to share his experience as a cautionary example once legal proceedings concluded. I placed the letter in the growing file of case materials we were developing for ethics education, struck by how a situation that had begun with such malicious intent was generating resources for positive change. Every aspect of the painful experience was being transformed into something constructive. Financial resources redirected to ethics education, personal betrayal converted to systemic improvement, private trauma repurposed as public benefit. 6 months after our anniversary celebration, I stood at a podium in the Harvard Law School auditorium, officially launching the Harrington Ethics Initiative before an audience of judges, lawyers, lawmakers, and media representatives. My father sat in the front row, his expression conveying pride that transcended any disappointment he might have felt about my alternative career path. The legal system, at its best, transforms conflict into resolution, chaos into order, injustice into remedy, I began. But this noble purpose requires more than just talented advocates and knowledgeable judges. It demands an unwavering commitment to ethical principles that must be continuously examined, vigorously defended, and thoughtfully evolved. As I outlined the initiative's three-pronged approach, education, advocacy, and system reform, I felt a profound sense of alignment between my personal experience and professional purpose. The betrayal that had shattered my world had also illuminated a path I might otherwise never have discovered. In conclusion, I said, looking out over the attentive faces, we cannot prevent every ethical violation or anticipate every attempt to corrupt our legal institutions. But we can create systems that detect breaches more quickly, respond more effectively, and recover more completely. And most importantly, we can foster a culture where ethical considerations are not afterthoughts, but the foundation of every legal decision and action. The applause that followed felt less like personal validation and more like collective commitment. A community of legal professionals acknowledging both the challenges we faced and our shared responsibility to address them. After the presentation, as I spoke with attendees during the reception, Eleanor approached with a distinguished older man I didn't immediately recognize. "Catherine," she said, "there's someone who requested an introduction. This is Justice William Brenner of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court." I shook his hand, surprised by his presence. Justice Brenner was widely respected as one of the court's most thoughtful members, particularly on matters of legal ethics and judicial accountability. "Ms. Harrington," he said warmly, "your presentation was exceptional, but more impressive is how you've transformed a personal injustice into institutional improvement. The court has been following your work with great interest." "Thank you, Justice Brenner. That means a great deal coming from you." "I'm not here merely to compliment your efforts," he continued. "The court is forming a special commission on judicial ethics and accountability in response to the issues raised by your WAM case. We would be honored if you would consider serving as a commissioner." The invitation represented an unprecedented opportunity to influence judicial ethics at the highest level of our state's court system. a platform far more significant than I could have achieved through traditional career advancement. I would be honored to serve, I replied without hesitation. As the evening concluded, my father and I walked together through the Harvard campus, its historic buildings illuminated against the autumn twilight. You know, he said reflectively, when your grandfather founded Harrington and Associates, he told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "Charles, a truly successful legal career isn't measured by cases won or money earned, but by whether the system is better for your having been part of it. By that measure, I think grandfather would be pleased with what we've accomplished," I replied. "Without question," my father agreed, though I doubt even he could have imagined how his granddaughter would fulfill that vision, not just participating in the system, but actively reforming it. We paused beside the law school's main entrance, where generations of legal minds had passed through on their journeys from students to practitioners to, in some cases, transformative leaders. "Catherine," my father said, his expression serious, "I want you to know how proud I am, not just of your professional accomplishments, though those are remarkable. I'm proud of the person you've revealed yourself to be through this ordeal. Your resilience, your integrity, your vision. These aren't qualities that can be taught. They're the essence of who you are." His words touched me deeply, affirming that my detour from the expected path, managing partner of Harrington and Associates, wasn't a disappointment, but perhaps a more authentic expression of our family's legacy. "Thank you, Dad. That means everything." As we continued our walk, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months, from devastating betrayal to meaningful purpose, from personal crisis to public leadership, from being defined by someone else's actions to determining my own path forward. Connor and Jessica had planned to use our anniversary celebration as the setting for my professional and personal humiliation. Instead, it had become the catalyst for transformation, not just for me, but potentially for aspects of the legal system itself. They had intended to diminish me, but their actions had ultimately revealed strengths I might never have discovered otherwise. The full circle of this realization brought not bitterness, but a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the betrayal itself, that remained unequivocally wrong, but for the growth, purpose, and clarity that had emerged from navigating its aftermath. As we reached my father's car, he touched my arm gently. "What's next for you, Catherine? Beyond the commission and the initiative?" I smiled, feeling the quiet confidence that comes from alignment with one's truest purpose. "I'm not entirely sure, Dad. And for the first time in my life, that uncertainty feels exciting rather than unsettling. I'm discovering that some paths only become visible once you've left the one you thought you were supposed to follow." My father nodded, understanding in his eyes. The best journeys often begin that way. As I watched him drive away, I turned toward my new home, walking with purposeful steps through the city that had witnessed both my deepest pain and my most meaningful growth. The betrayal that had been meant to end my story had instead begun a far more important chapter, one I was now writing entirely on my own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.